On July 14th, the video Shemitah Exposed, Financial Crisis Planned for September was released and went viral with millions of views. It has been the talk of the internet, and it covered a fall crisis to occur possibly as soon as September 15th of this year. Since that time, the New York Stock Exchange was mysteriously closed for nearly an entire day. The Chinese stock market has gone into free fall collapse, and just recently, the Dow Jones had its biggest intraday point drop of over 1,000 points and has fallen nearly 3,000 points since July. Back in July, Jeff Berwick of the Dollar Vigilante told subscribers to purchase stock market put options in anticipation of a fall crisis, and already they've risen from 6 cents to a high of $2.75 for a gain of 4,500%. Mainstream media has had a blackout on the Shemitah and on Jeff Berwick's amazing call, but in the alternative media, around the world, Jeff's Shemitah call has been praised.
All right, joining me now, Jeff Berwick. He is the chief editor of the Dollar Vigilante, world-famous financial analyst. We brought you on the show today because you recently produced a video. It's gone viral. It's called Shemitah Exposed, Financial Crisis Planned for September 2015.
Many are wondering what happens next. Did awareness of the Shemitah cause the markets to begin to crash a few weeks earlier than he predicted? Or is this just a pre-shock prior to a crisis of epic proportions throughout the remainder of this year?
We are honored to have back on Jeff Berwick of the Dollar Vigilante. As you may remember, he was on last in July and had a very ominous forecast for a coming crisis or collapse. And, since then, Jeff, everything you said seems to already be happening. The Chinese stock markets have been in free fall collapse, and the U.S. markets have had their biggest crash since 2008. And more than 20 other stock markets around the world have also crashed. First, remind our listeners about the Shemitah, and then give us an update on where things are at and where we go from here.
Certainly. For those who never saw our first video, Shemitah Exposed, Financial Crisis Planned for September 2015, I suggest you watch it because it clearly covers what usually occurs around Shemitah end days. Sometimes these events come after the end day, as it did on Black Monday in 1987 when it came about a month after, and sometimes, as may have happened this time, they come a little before. But that said, I believe we've cracked the code on an occult time schedule used by the financial elites and powers that be to orchestrate serious crises, collapses, and conflicts. It's something called the Shemitah, and it occurs every 7 years, but not always on the same dates, as it is based on the Hebrew calendar. As I pointed out in our first video, my research indicates that major crises occur systematically on or around these dates. The Shemitah end day for this year is on September 13th. In July, I released this information for the first time to the public, and it has literally gone viral. So much so that I think it is quite possible that the recent massive drops in the U.S. stock market may be partly to blame on people worldwide selling or shorting the stock market in advance of the next Shemitah end day in mid-September. Either that or the August drop was actual evidence of Shemitah. A quick search on Google Trends shows that the word Shemitah was unknown prior to 2014, and as of now, it is one of the most searched words on the internet. In other words, millions are now aware of it. This might change the game, or it may not. We'll find out more in September.
I have to say, I can't go anywhere, online or offline now, where people aren't talking about the Shemitah or an impending fall crisis.
It surprised even me. My objective was just to get this information out to as many people as possible so they are aware of a potential crisis this fall. I figured that a few thousand people would be exposed to it. I never could have imagined it would get this interest of so many worldwide. So much so, as I said, that we may have changed the game. So many people are aware of it that we may have caused it to start before they had planned. And furthermore, with so many people watching these key dates in September, they may not be able to pull off exactly what they had planned.
Yeah, of course, September may not be the end of it. These are world-shaking events.
The events clustered around Shemitah, even the ones that are not strongly expressed on Shemitah, certainly don't end with the end day. In fact, the events we're observing are a part of a longer-term trends that have been present to one extent or another and for a long time, and are probably only going to get worse in the future. Governments around the world are insolvent, banks around the world are so highly leveraged that anything can result in their imminent collapse, as we've already seen in Cyprus and Greece. Economic dysfunction and bank and stock market closures, tensions in the Middle East and war drums pounding from the Ukraine to Syria to North Korea, civil unrest as we've seen in Baltimore and Ferguson, climate change hysteria, to be used as an excuse to bring in more power to the UN and an eventual one-world government. All of these are part of what we see headed in our direction.
Okay, let's talk about what you expect may happen now.
In many ways, it has already started, as we've seen with the recent crash in the US stock markets and around the world. And if the elites are aware that the world is watching them with a microscope, they may have to adjust their plans. Perhaps they start earlier than expected to throw people off. That could be what is occurring now. Or maybe they unleash QE4 in September to cause a short-term surge in the stock market prior to once again yanking out the rug, perhaps later this year or even next year when fewer people expect it. But the trend is clear, and whether it is this month or next year, there is going to be a major financial crisis. That was already baked in the cake, with governments worldwide already insolvent, central banks printing money and keeping interest rates at zero, and sometimes even negative, for years now. It's a massive house of cards.
Right, you mentioned that last time that we're headed for a serious crisis with or without the Shemitah, but that there are so many bizarre events happening in September, you think it could signal the beginning of the end.
Yes, and with things already in process, I think it has already begun. The game is now on. They know we are watching them, and we know they are watching us. In fact, just days after our first video, we had been the recipient of a deluge of high-level cyber attacks on our website that continue to this day. This is becoming a real-time, serious game of chess, and a lot hangs in the balance. There are a lot of key and interesting events happening all throughout September and October, but the first key one is September 13th. That's the end day of the Shemitah. The last two Shemitah end days, in 2008 and 2001, both resulted in a massive stock market crash. This time, the end day falls on a Sunday, so that won't happen this time, but many people will be watching when the markets open on September 14th. And September 14th is actually the beginning of the Jubilee year. The Jubilee year comes after every 7th Shemitah, or after every 49th year period according to the Hebrew Bible. It is marked by the fact that all properties and possessions are supposed to be given back to their original owners. During the last two Jubilee years, there were major events in the area now called Israel, as Israel won the Six-Day War during the Jubilee year in 1967. And during the Jubilee year in 1918, Jerusalem was reliberated from the Arabs. What is most interesting about this Jubilee year is that the UN Security Council is likely to be voting on a UN resolution which will establish a Palestinian state at that time. It's being reported that France will submit this resolution for a vote after the 70th session of the UN General Assembly begins on the 15th of September. Speaking of that, the UN is actually calling this 70th session opening on September 15th its Jubilee session. Also, on September 15th is supposed to be the end of the military exercise called Jade Helm, which began on July 15th and is scheduled to end on September 15th. Jade Helm has so far been very quiet and in fact has been the subject of a media blackout. But what many don't know is that in recent weeks, massive amounts of military machinery has been moving all across the US. For example, on August 7th, this massive convoy of military equipment was recorded in Wyoming. On the same day, this movement was captured moving east in Idaho. Still, on August 7th, this convoy was spotted being transported to Oregon. On August 10th, this video was released of massive military equipment movement in South Carolina. Then, on August 16th, in Colorado, and on August 19th in Mississippi. It leaves one to wonder if they are not preparing for some sort of massive civil unrest on or near September 15th. Unfortunately, it is perfectly possible that the formal end of Jade Helm will not terminate a variety of informal but still considerable military activities. This would constitute a grave constitutional realignment for the U.S.'s socio-political system, and one from which the country might never recover. Then, the next day, the eyes of the financial world will be focused on the Federal Reserve's Open Market Committee meeting on September 16th and 17th. It's been widely expected that this may be the date for the 0.25% interest rate hike for the first time in 7 years. That alone can almost teeter the entire monetary and financial systems loaded with debt. What's new and interesting is that the Federal Reserve's chairwoman, Janet Yellen, was a no-show to their annual Jackson Hole meeting held just a few days ago. Every major Federal Reserve member was there except for Janet Yellen, leading to speculation she may be on the way out prior to the meeting in September and replaced by dual Israeli-U.S. citizen Stanley Fischer. The next day of interest is September 23rd. We're going into speculation here, but there are many rumors that CERN's Hadron Collider will be trying to break through to another dimension on that date. Interestingly, if you type in September 23rd, 2015 or 9/23/2015 into Google Maps, it shows CERN's location. In 2009, CERN's director of research, Sergio Bertolucci, talked about this and said, "Out of this door might come something, or we might send something through it." And Brett Bernhoft has theorized the Large Hadron Collider can actually rip the fabric of space-time and open portals into other dimensions to fuse two realities or timelines together. What is interesting about CERN is that its logo has 3 6s in it, and the statue outside of CERN is Shiva, Hinduism's god of destruction. And then, earlier this year, CERN released a bizarre video of workers dancing inside the Hadron Collider in a dance known as Shiva's Dance of Destruction. Then, the next day, on September 24th, the Pope will be speaking at the U.S. Congress, and on September 25th, he'll be back at the UN, where it is expected that they will roll out a new version of Agenda 21 called Agenda 2030. Agenda 2030, just like with Agenda 21, is really an agenda towards a one-world government. It should be noted that French Foreign Minister Laurent Fabius stated on May 13, 2014, that we have 500 days to avoid climate chaos, and 500 days from that speech lands on September 24th. Then September 28th is the last of a blood moon lunar tetrad. These eclipses are also said to be involved with seminal moments in Jewish history. This blood moon falls on the very first day of the Feast of Tabernacles called Sukkot. This will be a supermoon, and it will actually be visible in the city of Jerusalem on the Day of Atonement on September 28th. Then, a lot of eyes will be on October 1st as well, as known market predictor Martin Armstrong predicted nearly 30 years ago that October 1st, 2015 would ring in a major crisis, collapse, or paradigm shift in economic and political systems.
Wow. So if we get through September without a major event, are we home free?
Not by a long shot. As I've already stated, the financial, political, and monetary systems as we know them will collapse one way or another, sooner or later, and perhaps very soon. On October 20th, the IMF is expected to announce a reserve currency alternative to the US dollar, which could send hundreds of billions of dollars moving around the world, literally overnight. And just today, on September 1st, Russian President Vladimir Putin has drafted a bill that aims to eliminate the US dollar and the euro from trade between CIS countries. The International Monetary Fund has hinted that they will announce a new world currency as an alternative to the US dollar. The IMF just recently stated that it is holding off on adding the Chinese yuan to the SDR basket until 2016. And I believe this is an ongoing subterfuge war between China and the US. On August 11th, China devalued the yuan by 1.9%, sending shockwaves around the world and setting off a devastating impact to the US economy, causing markets to freefall. The next day, on August 12th, a massive explosion occurred in China, destroying 6 city blocks on the edge of the city of Tianjin. The explosion was so massive and resulted in a mushroom cloud and a giant hole that has many wondering if it wasn't some sort of nuclear weapon. By August 17th, there were reports of military helicopters circling Beijing, along with warnings that China is on the verge of declaring regional martial law because of escalating war tensions with both the United States and Japan. And then, as I mentioned, on August 19th, the International Monetary Fund said that it will freeze its benchmark currency basket until October 2016. The IMF was expected to add the Chinese yuan to the currency basket this September or October. Then, on August 22nd, another massive explosion rocked China's manufacturing heartland in the Shandong province, obliterating another large industrial storage center. The cause of the explosion, once again, is utterly unknown to the authorities. Then, later that day, a massive explosion destroyed a U.S. Army munitions storage facility near Tokyo. 2 weeks ago, we received some information from a Dollar Vigilante subscriber in the U.S. who said the following. I have an extremely high-level connection overseas in a large Asian country. One top-level person was supposed to come out this week with his airline ticket purchased already. Above him, which isn't too far away from his level, unexpected orders came in that no high-level officials will be traveling to the U.S. for approximately 2 months, and the official reason was government meetings. That 2-month time frame is for August and September. Are all these events connected or just coincidental? I don't know, but nothing would surprise me at this point.
Are you thinking 2015 and 2016 could look a lot like 2008, 2009?
It's already looking that way, and the only difference is this time around things are going to be much worse. If you compare the 3-year period leading up to August of 2008 to the 3-year period leading up to August 2015, it does look quite similar. Of course, as we know, between August of 2008 and January of 2009, the Dow ended up dropping 40%. Recently, junk bond yields have risen dramatically in the last year, rising from 8% to over 13%. When looked at from a longer scale of 10 years, this move doesn't look so significant. But if you notice, junk bonds are at nearly the exact same level they were at in June 2008. At that time, the move didn't look so significant either. Then, in the span of 6 months, junk bond yields rose from below 15% to a peak of 45% by December. With global debt having risen more than 50% since 2008, the system cannot handle another shock like this. In terms of shipping rates, last week, Reuters reported that key shipping freight rates for transporting containers from ports in Asia to Northern Europe fell by almost 27%. The collapse in rates has been massive. According to Reuters, it was the 3rd consecutive week of falling freight rates on the world's busiest route, and rates are now nearly 60% lower than 3 weeks ago. Meanwhile, just like in 2008, commodities continue to crash. As gauged by the Bloomberg Commodities Index, we are now at the lowest levels seen this century.
All right, I asked this last time we spoke with hesitation, but are there any positives?
There's been one very noticeable change in the last few weeks. Normally, over the last 5 years, when the markets and commodities went down, gold would go down too. This has not happened this time around. Gold, for the first time in a long time, seems to have caught a tailwind and may have finally bottomed after hitting its high nearly 4 years ago above 1,800. The most interesting part of this is that gold seemed to have a major rebound starting at the beginning of August. And it was on August 6, 2015, Goldman Sachs, which has issued very bearish forecasts on long-term gold prices, took delivery of a 3.2-ton purchase of physical gold. And on the same day, on August 6, HSBC, which also claims to be very bearish, took delivery of another 3.9-ton purchase of physical gold. In both cases, the purchases are registered as being for the benefit of the bank's own house account, rather than the account of its customers. Perhaps this is a case of watch what they do and not what they say. The fact that they bought physical, as opposed to the myriad of securitized paper gold products, speaks volumes. Especially when Money Metals Exchange, a top U.S. national gold retailer, released a report and said, "We're seeing more buying interest than at any time since the 2008 financial crisis. If we see a further spike in demand, the whole supply chain could be cleaned out. In that event, customers will face long lead times and limited product choices. Gold supply is showing some signs of strain, but silver could become completely unavailable." According to Money Metals Exchange, demand for physical gold and silver surged 135% since June. I reiterate my prediction that physical gold and silver may be nearly impossible to purchase in the coming months or years in exchange for fiat currency. But if you own some now, you should be in good stead. As well, at the Dollar Vigilante, we have numerous different strategies and recommendations to not only survive through the Shemitah, but also profit, including one trade we had recommended in July, which rose 4,500% in the last week of August. As well, I recommend that people have a bank account outside of the US, Europe, or any Western country, and suggest they go to tdvoffshore.com for more info on that. As well, if you have funds in an IRA, I suggest you move them into a self-directed IRA and get the funds outside of the US. You can also find more info on that at tdvoffshore.com. And if possible, get a second passport. It gives you a lot of options, and you can find numerous options available for that at tdvimmigration.com.
What else can people do to protect themselves?
I've just released a book, Shemitah Trends, The Plot to Enslave Humanity and How to Find Freedom, that you can get for free at surviveshemitah.com. The book not only talks about the Shemitah and the 7-year cycle, but also goes into detail on how we as humanity have gotten to the point we are at today. How we have given up control of our individual lives to a small group of elite that apparently can cause such devastation, and often on purpose, for their own personal gain. As well, we are now entering into a period of high volatility and risk, and things will change nearly daily for the foreseeable future. So I recommend people take advantage of our Survive Shemitah package at surviveshemitah.com to get nearly daily updates and information, news, and analysis as things progress. We're entering into a whole new world, and you will never hear about it on CNN or CNBC. This revolution will not be televised.
Well, Mr. Berwick, you are always fascinating to talk to, and we'll be watching how things play out over the rest of this year. Are there any final thoughts you'd like to convey?
Yes, many people like to say that I'm a doom and gloomer, but the opposite is the case. All of the centralized constructs built up by a small group of elite over the last few centuries, including the bankrupt governments we have today, and the central banks that impoverish us all for the enrichment of a few, are nearing collapse. To me, that is a very good thing. The issue will be getting through the transitionary stage during and after this collapse. But once we get through that, I believe humanity has the potential to have a much less controlled and centrally planned world in which we'll have peace and prosperity like we've never known it. I believe an awakening is going on. Just the fact that a video we did a little over a month ago is being talked about worldwide and people are acting on that information shows that. The internet has enabled humanity to get access to the truth more than at any time in human history, and the truth is kryptonite to the central banksters, politicians, and those who want a one-world government. We need far more than one government in this world. We need 7 billion governments. People need to take control of their own lives again and to get right with themselves, both physically, mentally, financially, and spiritually. I think we'll get there, but the transition is going to be messy.
To get access to a free white paper on how to survive the Shemitah and receive a free copy of the book Shemitah Trends, go to surviveshemitah.com. Also, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to this channel, and share with friends if you found this information important.